Well, thank you very much, Dalbir. You give a fairly depressing picture of the region, I have to say. And I wonder, let me ask you a few questions about this, or make a few comments, if I may. You know, you said China created the 9-dash line, but in fact, Taiwan did. The Chinese nationalists did. All China did as a matter of state succession was take over the 9-dash line. And recently we had Ouyang, the Director General of the 9-dash line Directorate in the Foreign Ministry of China in Australia. And I asked him directly, are you planning to take over the islands of Vietnam or from Taiwan, who has the biggest island there, or the Philippines? And everyone's worried about what you're doing. And he said, look, we're the first country that would suffer if there's a trade embargo or shipping dispute in the South China Sea. The last thing we want to do is stop mercantile trade. And secondly, we're not going to take over other islands. That would lead to war, and we don't want war. Now, do you think I was just being naive in seeing some truth in what he said?
Sorry. See, there was dispute between Philippines and China on the islands. And Philippines took China to an international arbitration court. And that decision was made in favor of Philippines. But China said that this decision is null and void. We don't agree with this decision. So that is the case. If China is not claiming that, China should have respected the international decision. And even not respecting, then China says, why China is putting the claims on that if they want peace and not a war. Another aspect comes with the Vietnam. There are issues with the oil rigs. And during the oil rigs, it appears that the Vietnamese ships are regularly harassed by Chinese. That we see in the popular media. So the issue then comes the Paracel Islands. Paracel Islands are being militarized, Spratly Islands, and the missiles are being put on those islands. The issue is that if China wants trade, yes, trade is great. Freedom of navigation, yes. Then why militarizing those islands, number one? Why the other countries are going against China? China, last point, sir.
Sure.
China to develop, it needs very conducive environment in its neighborhood. It needs the trust of the neighboring countries. But the countries feel very uncertain about China.
Sure.
So there comes the statement you said, and there is some gap in that.
Yeah. Yes. Would you agree with me that China is motivated by the fact that in the 19th century she was completely humiliated by the European powers and by the United States, who all had colonies in China, and that China is now realising its role, as it was in the 15th and 16th century, as one of the most advanced countries in the world, and it's simply reclaiming that. Would you perhaps agree with me that China is simply forcing back what has become an American lake since the Second World War, and that China, like the United States, doesn't want the other to have very close associations around its own border? Would you at least concede that that is a motivation of the Chinese?
Yeah, we see in Chinese media and Chinese leadership indicating at the century of humiliation. And they should come out of that one. They were humiliated. We agree. There are no disputes about that. But other countries were also colony. India was a colony. Sure. And when independence came, it was divided into two countries. So if India says that we want to take revenge from Britain because we were a colony and our raw materials were taken, I think that will be sort of revisiting history. Or it can be in a sense that Germany united under Hitler. So then there will be different tendencies that, we were humiliated, so we want a reaction to that.
Of course, and India is one of many countries humiliated, not least by the British, most by the British, but also by the French and by the Germans and other colonial powers. I agree with you that India is like the cat that walks by itself. India is a country that has its own motivations, its own ways of doing things. India is a country that regards Australia with some condescension because it sees Australia ever since the Bandung Conference and Menzies refusing to go along to the non-aligned conference.
Right.
as a satrap of the United States, with some reason. So India, you know, I agree with you that India is out there and it's not going to form an alliance with the United States or Japan or Australia against China. May I also put to you that when you say that it was the Spratlys and the Paracels were simply taken over, a little known fact is that Japan bequeathed the Spratlys and the Paracels to Taiwan, to the Chinese nationalists, at the end of the Second World War, just as they bequeathed the Kurils to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. They're not known anymore, but the fact is that legitimately Japan handed those countries over in international law, and that's where they belong. Do you concede that point? You agree with that?
Yeah, the islands, the Diao Islands, or you want to say it from the Japanese point of view, yes, were inherited by Japan. But coming specifically to Paracel and Spratly Islands, I have published a research paper on the Paracel Islands, and looking history, that the Chinese have put claims for that, but those claims were that the fishermen used to visit there. So that way, if you're looking from during the Vietnam War and the previously, the China has not produced any claims, very substantial claims to other organizations, United Nations, that it has claims over those islands.
But Japan bequeathed them legally to the Chinese nationalists, and by state law succession, China took those over. I suggest to you, I submit to you that this is really a legal occupation. Can I move on from there, though?
Right, yeah.
The US, you say, has been the guarantor of peace in the Asia-Pacific region ever since the end of the Second World War. That's a constant threnody you hear among Australian politicians, that the United States has guaranteed peace. What about the war in Vietnam? I mean, that's not guaranteeing peace, that's causing war, which led to nothing other than a takeover in the end by the communist government of Vietnam in what is now a rich, prosperous country, just like China is. So I suggest to you that we should get beyond the idea of America being a guarantor of peace. Are they going to guarantee the peace in Iran right now? This is one of the biggest problems we have. All the things that Donald Trump is doing to stir the Iranians, let's hope the Iranians can hold their indignation and not do something stupid. Shooting down a drone is one thing, but they're not going beyond that yet. That is one of the existential problems we have right now. Morrison, our Prime Minister, is meeting with Trump in the margins of the G20 in Osaka next Saturday. I hope and pray that he is going to not say, as Turnbull did, is that my phone? It's not my phone.
No.
Someone else's. He's not going to say, as Turnbull did to Trump about going to North Korea, wherewith you were joined at the hip. I would hope that he's going to have... And Morrison has shown a few made a few intelligent comments about this. Let's hope that he's going to say, listen, hold off, leave that alone. That's a powder keg. We don't need to go there. Do you think that... do you agree with that hope?
See, there are 2 points that you raised. First is that the US as a guarantor of peace. See, from 1945 to 2019, only two wars have been enlisted, Vietnam War and the Korean War. And these were during the heat of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union and China were involved on one side and United States on the other side. Considering other countries having the different issues, interstate issues, but that has remained relatively peaceful. The second one is that since Donald Trump has come into the office, White House, United States has shown some signal of withdrawal. And with that withdrawal, see, in Australia, we feel that heat. Our Prime Minister, after taking oath, his first visit was to the Pacific Island. Why? We don't have very big trade. We don't have any strategic alliance system with them. Because if the US dilutes its alliance system, that it impinges on us that what is happening strategically and security perspective in our neighborhood. And as the Chinese investment and other investments come there, we are worried. We were not during the Cold War or during the strong alliance system with the United States.
I'd suggest to you that the reason Morrison is going to the Pacific Islands is that Australia, the government of Australia, is worried about Chinese influence there and wants to get in ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why if US withdraws, We have to be alert and we have to go on our own, extra miles.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely, Dalbir, that
Yes.
The United States wishes to maintain the status quo in the region.
Right.
What is that status quo? That is American sovereignty over the region.
Right.
America still thinks it has the right to go right up to the Chinese mainland and surveil what's going on. It seems to me, and many of my colleagues in Canberra, Hugh White amongst them, others are saying, listen, the United States has to realise that it's on a descending path, and that China is ascending. Australia's role should be as a kind of a mediator in this, in the interests of peace. It's in no one's interest that there should be war between China and the United States. You talk about the increase in Chinese military expenditure, and you show a graph, and that's true.
Yeah.
But compare that with the United States military expenditure, which spends more on its military equipment than the next 10 countries combined.
That's true.
When you talk about Belts and Road and Chinese bases in the Indian Ocean, think of Diego Garcia, an American base. Think of all the American bases that they have. Now, I'm not suggesting they suddenly take them away. I am suggesting that America has a legitimate role to play as a counterweight in the region. Culturally, linguistically, historically, America is our friend. But goodness me, it seems to me that we should have a government and an opposition that are prepared to go to the Americans to say, now listen here, you're going a bit far. Let's wind this back. Do you think that would be a good thing for us to do?
I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on Australia's foreign policy like you have the practical experience of dealing with these internal intricacies also. But how I feel as a citizen of Australia, that first thing for a country is the national security, our sovereignty. And for that, that has been guaranteed by the United States as alliance partner of the ANZUS, and that has worked well so far. Now the issue comes that China is rising. Yes, a country working hard should rise. But when a country rises, there is a disturbance in the balance of power shifts. And that shift is very, very opaque in case of China. China is developing economically. They want peaceful development, but they are also militarizing side by side. So ultimately, the question will boil how weak the United States is and how strong China is. And as such, there are no mechanism or calculations to calculate that power.
I'd suggest to you that the Chinese realise very well that America has an infinitely superior military force.
Right.
What China is trying to develop is area denial.
Right.
By saying to the Americans, don't come into our space, we're like a porcupine and we'll prick you if you do.
Yeah.
You talk about ANZUS, and let me make this point to you and ask your opinion.
Right.
The ANZUS Treaty has been elevated to mythological status as a guarantor of America coming to Australia's support if we're attacked. It does nothing of the sort. All it does is guarantee that there will be an agreement to consult if either party is attacked in the Pacific region. Now, John Howard was one of the people who distorted this by applying ANZUS to our disastrous contribution to the invasion of Iraq. I just would hope that people would get back to realise what ANZUS is. There is no guarantee. At one stage when we were in East Timor and the Indonesians were there, the Americans refused to help Australia under ANZUS. And they march by their own drum. Nations have permanent interests. They don't have permanent friends. Again, I say America is a friend and has been for a long time. My time at Harvard made me realise how close we were in many ways. But we just shouldn't fool ourselves. Australia is a middle power, and it seems to me that we should stand on our own feet and work with the countries in the region in developing a strategy, including China.
Yeah, that should be. Australia has no animosity as such with any country, and Australia is the most well-received country. Yes. A very good soft power country, basically. But with China's smart power and soft power, there is a gap between the two countries. Yeah. And how to maneuver that? Now it is our biggest trade partner, and then relations are as such cordial between the two countries. but China is rising. So is its military power. And
So it will continue to do so.
And so is it's a demonstration of the power coming into the Pacific Islands, presence in the Indian Ocean. So Australia should be prepared for that.
We are preparing, I suggest.
Yes, that's the main
Anyway, my dear and esteemed nephew,
Yes.
Amit Polat, there is frantically suggesting it's time we brought this very interesting discussion to a close. And we have a few questions.